Hello, welcome back. Today we want to talk about the other section of Congress, which is the Senate. Just to jog your memory, the Senate has 100 members. Every state gets 2 because we have equal representation in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, we have 435 members. Every state gets at least 1, but that's based on the state's population. So let's get to it. The Senate, qualifications and terms for the Senate. If you would like to be a senator, you have to be at least 30 years old. You have to have been a United States citizen for at least 9 years, and you have to be a resident of the state you're going to represent. If you need to jot down those 3 qualifications again, pause me and rewind me. In the Senate, let me backtrack for a second. The Senate actually serves 6-year terms, okay? So backtrack to what we were talking about a couple days ago. Every 2 years, so in November of every even-numbered year, we have a congressional election. Okay, every 4 years in that congressional election, we elect a president. Well, every 2 years, we elect 1/3 of the Senate. Okay, so basically, whenever you're a senator, depending on when you're elected, you're put into one of 3 classes. Okay, and that basically tells us when you're going to be up for re-election. And what that does is create something called a continuous body. Now, this was a vocabulary term that some of you had some difficulty with. So here's a continuous body. Since only 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election at one time, 2/3 of the Senate remain in office. So there's continuously somebody in the Senate that has been there before. That's the concept of the continuous body, okay? There you go. 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years, leaving 2/3 of the Senate present. If you need to pause me and rewind me, do that for sure. All right, and like I said previously, when a senator is elected, they're placed into one of 3 classes. So if you're in class 1, maybe that means that you just got elected. So your term won't expire for 6 years. If you're in class 2, maybe you're almost halfway through your term, so maybe your term will expire in 4 years. If you're in class 3, then maybe your term expires next. The next time we have a congressional election, maybe you'll be up for re-election. We will look at that website in class, and hopefully that'll help clear anything up, any questions that you have, okay? So function and rules. The function of the Senate is just like it is in the House of Representatives. The function is to make laws. Remember, the House of Representatives and the Senate together make the legislative branch, and their job is to make laws. Now, the rules in the Senate are much more informal, okay? One of the big things that we talked about with the House was that committees are extremely important, that you have to have committees in order to get stuff done. Well, in the Senate, we do have committees, and they're important, but they're just not quite as essential as they are in the House. And that's just because the Senate doesn't have 435 people, okay? So the idea of the Senate is to have this informal atmosphere where all of our senators can discuss ideas and legislation freely. All right, moving on then to leadership in the Senate. Now, in the November elections that we just had, the Senate changed ownership, if you will, okay? The Democrats going into the 2014 election had the majority in the Senate, which means that there were more Democrats than Republicans. A lot of Democrats lost their seats in the midterm elections. So the Republican Party now controls the Senate. Now, the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, he's a Democrat. He is also what we call the President of the Senate, okay? So as President of the Senate, and you may want to jot some of this stuff down, as President of the Senate, Joe Biden has no authority to propose laws. He has no authority to vote on laws. The only thing he can do is to vote to break a tie. That's it, okay? So we have 100 senators. There is a definite possibility of having a 50-50 split. Okay, and in that case, the vice president would jump in and cast his vote. That's the only time he does really anything in the Senate, okay? So because of that, a lot of vice presidents don't really take their role in the Senate very seriously, okay? Because they don't really feel like they have much of a job to do. So in that case, the president pro tempore kind of takes over, leads in the absence of the vice president, okay? The president pro tempore right now is Orrin Hatch, okay? And he is a Republican. Now, last year, we had a different president pro tempore. And that's because the president pro tempore is chosen from among the majority party. Okay? So basically, the person that gets to be president pro tempore is the person in the Republican Party that's been there the longest, and that's Orrin Hatch. Okay? So his job is to preside over the Senate when the vice president's not there. We also have, just like we had in the House of Representatives, minority and majority floor leaders. The minority floor leader right now is Harry Reid. He is a Democrat. The minority whip is Richard Durbin. He is also a Democrat. The majority floor leader is Mitch McConnell. He is a Republican. And the majority whip is John Cornyn. Okay? Now, the majority and minority leaders have the same responsibilities in the Senate as they do in the House. So just to refresh your memory, the majority floor leader is supposed to draft and help move his party's bills through the Senate. Same thing for the Democrats and the minority party. Okay? The majority whip and the minority whip are responsible for whipping up votes, making sure that people from their party are present to vote on important bills. Okay? Now, the Senate, the lawmaking function. Okay, Thomas Jefferson, back whenever our country was being founded, he didn't really understand the point of the Senate. He thought it was just kind of useless because he said that the people are represented by the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives that's where we draft a whole lot of important bills. So why do we need the Senate? And he's talking to George Washington, and as he's doing that, he's drinking a cup of tea or coffee. I don't remember what it was, but it's really hot. So what does he do? He takes the cup and he pours a little bit into his saucer. And what does that do? It allows the liquid to cool, okay? And then he takes his saucer and he pours it back into his cup. So it's cooled it off enough for him to drink it. And he's talking to George Washington about this, and Washington said, well, you just answered your question. And Jefferson said, I don't know what you mean. And he said, well, the House of Representatives is the teapot, if you will, okay? It's boiling with lots of different ideas and lots of opinions and lots of heated arguments. And in order for the legislation to be able to function, it has to cool in the Senate. Okay, so that's where we get that idea of cooling legislation. Okay, so lawmaking in the Senate. First of all, introduction of the bill. That's step one. Only senators may introduce a bill, but any senator can do that. The Senate leadership controls the flow of the bills. So right now the Senate is controlled by the Republican Party, okay? So if you're a Democrat, you're really going to have to work to get your bill pushed through. After the bill has been introduced, it's put on only one of two calendars, okay? It's either put on the calendar of general orders or put on the executive calendar. Now, the executive calendar is only for treaties and nominations. So anything that has to do, and this is how I remember it, anything that has to do with the executive branch goes on the executive calendar. So for example, if the president wants the Senate to ratify a treaty, that would go on the executive calendar. If the president wants the Senate to approve a nomination to the Supreme Court, that would go on the executive calendar. So everything else, all the other bills that the Senate hears, goes on the calendar of general orders. Okay? Step 3 is discussion and debate. There is a committee step in this. It would be in between the introduction and the calendar process. But whenever it is the bills are actually discussed on the Senate floor, this is where a lot of time is spent. Okay? Senators have the privilege of unlimited discussion. Okay? So that basically means that if you want to talk for 3 hours about your bill, then you go for it. Okay? Now, as you can imagine, that can get pretty lengthy with, 100 people. If you really want to go above and beyond that, though, you can do something called filibuster. And the filibuster is only available in the Senate, and it's the idea of an unlimited stall tactic, basically. Okay? So let's say that you really don't like a bill. Okay, you're a senator, you really don't like it. You know that there's not enough opposition in the Senate to kill the bill. So your idea is to filibuster. Okay, you are basically going to talk for a really long time to try to persuade other members of the Senate, to persuade your constituents, the people that you represent, to voice their opinions on the bill and maybe make a change. Okay, so again, that's something that is only available in the Senate. The House of Representatives cannot do that. Okay, so one guy, Strom Thurmond, we'll talk about him in We'll talk about him in class tomorrow. Basically, he comes up with the idea that he's just going to talk for a really long time. He talked for 24 hours and 18 minutes. 24 hours and 18 minutes, an entire day plus 18 minutes. He talked against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, just a few hours after his filibuster ended, the Senate voted to pass this. So his filibuster meant nothing except for he broke a record. So what do you do if someone just keeps talking incessantly? You can vote for cloture, okay? And that is basically a number that has to be met. People have to vote for cloture in order for the filibuster to end, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop there for today. We will discuss and have an activity in class tomorrow that deals with lawmaking in the Senate. So if you have any questions, let me know.